Hello and welcome to week 2. This week we're going to focus in on understanding better how do we formulate strategy, what are some of the different choices we have, and what's the role that vision, mission, and values play. From our strategic leadership skills, we're going to look at a number of different models, including level 5 leadership, which many of you have probably already heard of. We talk about it in LDR 6100. As well as looking at something you probably haven't seen before, which is the Pearson Critical Thinking Assessment. It's a very strong assessment. I'm giving you a link on your syllabus to obtain a free copy of the assessment. We're going to talk at the end of our time together today about what do you do with the results and what do we learn from that. So in terms of our learning objectives for this week, UFC identified the first 3 that I've talked about already, but I want to also discuss the external analysis, which is one of the key elements that we use under our strategic analysis with a lot of different tools. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I'm going to create a separate video just because otherwise I think it tends to get too long. And it will also enable you to very quickly look at the external analysis information when you and your team go to work on your case study. Last week we looked at a number of definitions for strategy, and I'm very partial to the one you see on this slide. This concept is that strategy is really a series of moves that leaders make or companies make to achieve sustained competitive advantage. And we heard that before last week when we talked about our focuses around sustained competitive advantage. Strategic thinking. The way we define strategic thinking is that it's a skill set or a habit of mind for deliberately considering the best course of action for creating value for one's enterprise. Notice it does not necessarily have to be at the executive level, that all members of our organization can play a role and expand their own strategic thinking. Michael Porter really summarizes this concept of how we define leadership in a very simple way. The first question he asks is the game good? In other words, is this a market that we want to play in? Is this a market that's going to provide us with sustained competitive advantage? And then the second part of the strategic question, or the critical strategic definition, is, and what's our company's position in this game? So is the game good? And what's the company's position in the game? Last week, we looked at a model for strategic management. We called it Figure 1.2 in your book, and you see it reflected on this slide here. And remember, we said we start with our vision, mission, our values, and those help define the guardrails for our goals. We then look at our analysis, an external analysis, which looks at our opportunities and threats within the market, and then our internal analysis, which helps define our strengths and weaknesses. And based on all the analysis that are subset of both external and internal analysis, we then formulate our strategy. And our strategy can be at a corporate level, at a business level, and at a functional level. Once we've formulated a strategy, we then implement it. What I'd like to do is introduce a slightly different version of that in the next slide. So you see the same types of steps, but sometimes this slide helps synthesize action steps specific for the strategic management process. So as we said, we start out, of course, with our vision, mission, and values. And then we move into our analysis, our external analysis and our internal analysis. From there, we formulate our goals. We can formulate business and corporate and functional goals. And from there, we move into implementation. So when we're looking at implementation, of course, it includes things like what structure should we have, how should our culture support it, what kind of controls are we using, how is our corporate governance, what ethics, which ties to our values, we're going to play. And then we're also looking at implementation in terms of all the analysis that we're doing that gives us feedback about how well our strategy is going. Now, this sounds like a very top-down process. And a lot of organizations still use this top-down strategic planning process. However, it may not adapt well to change. Very often, this is a company that's a little bit slower moving. We tend to have a lot of meetings to figure out what the strategy is, and then it's defined and everyone kind of marches in step to it. Formulation is not separate from implementation, so often there's a connection between as we're formulating what steps we're taking to implement. Information tends to be very top down in one way. And the challenge here is, what if the executives who tend to define this, what if their vision is wrong? What if they did not read the market correctly? So one of the examples that we have for this top-down approach was, of course, Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs felt that he could identify what the customer's needs were even better than the customers could. And so he defined what the product strategy would be and what the overall strategy would be for Apple. So we came up with a slightly different approach because sometimes this top-down analysis didn't really lead to the best results. And the concept here was scenario planning. What if instead we ask a lot of what if questions and we create a number of different scenarios? It could end up being this, it could end up being that. And then we often run them through simulations. So we're going to be doing a simulation later in our class to give you some sense of what scenario planning looks like. We look at both optimistic and pessimistic futures and the risks associated with each. And that gives us some insights about where we think there are opportunities within a market. We get to play often with the different values that help us figure out whether the market's going to be effective and what kinds of things we can do within it. Now, there are some challenges with scenario planning. First, it can be a lot of money in terms of building the simulation. Second, it can really help clarify what our key risk areas are and what our weaknesses are. But it can also lead to wrong conclusions because, of course, any kind of information you're inputting is going to help define what the output is. So you have to be a little bit careful about what kind of data you're putting in. It takes a long time to put these things together, and you need a lot of analytical tools. As a result, a lot of organizations don't tend to use scenario planning. While the top-down and scenario planning approaches tend to be still from an executive level or a senior leadership level, the last is what we call planned emergence. And that differs in that it can also be bottom up, that we can get the expertise of the folks who are working on the front lines or within the organization who might have some terrific ideas. And I think the best example that we have seen of emergent strategy was a product line that Starbucks ended up offering. Initially, it was started by a manager who was getting requests in California for blended drinks, and her name was Dina Campion. And she ended up finally reaching out to her previous manager who had moved up to Seattle and saying, you know, we're getting these requests for this iced beverage. Folks really like it. I really like it. Could we offer this as a drink within our company? And we had a lot of folks come down from Seattle to evaluate the beverage and what was going on within the store. And at the end, they came back, they shipped a blender down to the store and said, let's experiment. Let's try it out, see how it works. Of course, this ultimately became the Frappuccino. And now there are 36,000 different types of Frappuccinos held around the world. And as you're seeing, as I'm talking, you're seeing the video of a screenshot of what I just found today on Frappuccino for the Starbucks websites. And you can see just the number of different Frappuccinos that are offered now. And this product strategy really came out of this idea that folks have different personal experiences, that sometimes they're working with customers and they see a need, and it can create a whole product strategy associated for the organization. But in order to get these frontline insights, we need to make sure we have a process to gather them. And so this idea of a planned emergence strategy is very effective in smaller companies initially, or companies that tend to be in industries that have a lot of dramatic change. So if you're a company that tends to have change on a regular basis, think about how can you get the information from those folks who are on the front line? How do we incorporate strategic thinking from all levels within the organization to help better make sure our strategy is really meeting the needs not only of the customers, but the changes within the market? So we started out by talking about how we formulate strategy, and that it can be in three different ways, either top down, through scenario planning, or just emerges as we start to react to the market itself. Within each role, however, at each level of the organization, we're going to have a different focus. So we said at the beginning with our model that we would formulate strategies for the corporate level, for the business level, and for the functional level. We'll go into more detail as we work together over the next 6 weeks on this, but really it has to do with a different set of questions. So at a corporate level, we're doing the same kinds of things, an external analysis and an internal analysis. An external analysis really helping us think through the opportunities and threats. The internal analysis thinking about what are our strengths and weaknesses. But we have some other questions we have to think about too. How do we create synergies across our different business industries? So we have another overlay in addition to the analysis that we always do, external and internal. But now how do we create synergies within our different business units? What geography should we be playing in? And that helps us then think differently about the markets and the business products that we're going to leverage. General managers tend to focus more on what we call the SBUs, and you read about that a little bit in the different chapters that we've had. General managers are not only thinking about the usual internal and external analysis, but they're also very much thinking about that internal analysis from the point of view of how do we gain competitive advantage based on our functions? What kinds of things can we do that would make a difference? So for example, for Amazon, our general managers are really thinking about the logistics. How do we get the most productivity to give us a competitive advantage using logistics or using the kind of digital analysis that we have? So general managers are really focusing not only on the market itself, but particularly on how do we create superior performance? How do we get the most out of all of the different assets that we have? And how do we get our functions to play well together? Functional managers tend to be responsible for just that one functional area. So remember we said with Amazon, as a general manager, I'm thinking about the logistics, and I'm probably thinking about, who I'm hiring, what my talent strategy is. I'm thinking about the digital advantages that we bring because we have a lot of digital data that Amazon considers a strategic advantage. But as a functional manager, my focus is really just on that function. So I'm thinking just about logistics and how do I leverage automation and talent so that we have the right people and right assets in place to make sure that the function really is strong. And so my strategic focus tends to be just around that functional area. So now we're going to start to deep dive into each one of these elements. And for today, our deep dive is going to be around the vision, mission, and the overall values of this organization. So let's first start out by defining what do we mean by each one of these elements. So a vision is aspirational. What do we want to accomplish? How do we make sure that we're defining a vision in a way that connects to not only our customers, but also the employees? So they tend to feel a part of something that's bigger than themselves. Mission is really about how do we do it? How do we accomplish our goals? What kinds of ways are we going to make sure that we're able to take the vision and actually accomplish something? So if you think about the vision as the aspirational piece, the mission statement is how do we accomplish it? The values are our guardrails. In other words, what commitments are we making in terms of how we will work together and how we will work within our communities and our businesses. And so as a result, it helps us think ethically about what are the kinds of things that we can do and what are the rules by which we will play as an organization. So a vision is aspirational. It captures what the organization wants to look like. It helps motivate employees by aiming for a specific target. And it leaves room for different contributions. It's broad enough that we can use this vision for multiple years. As I mentioned, vision tends to be important because it helps us connect to something. For example, Nordstrom's vision is to provide outstanding service every day, one customer at a time. So it's succinct, very clear, it's effective because we understand what it means, and it helps as an employee, helps me understand for Nordstrom's what I should be focusing in on. I should be focusing on outstanding service, and I should think about it at the individual customer level. Vision statements can either be product focused or customer centric focused. So some examples of some product focused vision, kind of vision and mission statements. McDonald's is to be the world's best quick service restaurant. Citibank's product vision and mission is to be the most respected global financial services company. Barnes & Noble's product-focused vision and mission statement was to operate the best specialty retail business in America, regardless of the product we sell. So very often, a product-focused vision can help us think about what we want to focus in on for our businesses and how we will add value to the marketplace and to our customers. However, it can also be fairly narrow. So if we define our business as the railroads did initially, which is we're in the railroad business, then we won't think more broadly as other competitors come in. So for the railroad business, it was trucking and the addition of places like FedEx, which could fly goods back and forth. And so they had to really redefine who were they, what value did they bring. A really good example of using a product vision effectively really comes from Shell Canada. So Shell had become a fairly diverse set of businesses, and they weren't yielding the financial returns that their stakeholders expected. They spent a long time doing some soul searching, and what they realized was at the heart of their business, they are a low-cost producer of oil and gas. Their core competency then needed to be about creating value for customers at a low cost. In other words, their focus had to be on creating activities that yielded the greatest return in terms of the financial components. So think about your own company right now. Is your company's vision and mission statement product focused or customer centric focused? Some vision statements are customer oriented. We define the business, we define the vision in terms of how we provide solution to our customer. So for example, for Google, it's to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So we're focusing on our customers who are information seekers. For Nike, to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Who are our customers? Athletes. Yahoo, to make the world's daily habits more inspiring and entertaining. Who's our customers? Internet users who are daily getting on the internet to gain inspiring and entertaining information. Let's look at one that's not on that slide. For CarMax, to provide our customers with great quality cars at great prices with exceptional customer service. Darden Restaurants, to nourish and delight everyone we serve. So the vision statements help orient our employees as to how we're going to play in this marketplace and who our customers are. Vision statements help create a competitive advantage because they help align the whole organization to how we are going to add value and what markets we are going to play. Remember Michael Porter at the beginning, is the game good and where do we stand in terms of the game? Well, this is helping define us how we're going to play in this market so that the game is going to be effective for us, that we're going to be able to play well in this marketplace. Now, at the discussion board this week, we're going to be focusing in on Pepsi, and there's quite a bit more information under the assignment folder for that. However, I want to look at Pepsi's vision, and Pepsi focuses in on and orients itself around performance with purpose. So notice their vision statement. At the heart of PepsiCo is performance with purpose. Our vision is to deliver top-tier financial performance over the long term by integrating sustainability into our business strategy, leaving a positive imprint on society and in the environment. So step back. What did we just learn about Pepsi? They're focusing on top financial performance, they're focusing on sustainability, and they're looking at corporate social responsibility. Now, if you go back to our assignments folder, within that folder you'll see information for our case study, and that will include a link to PepsiCo's Performance with Purpose and provide you with more information around Pepsi overall. Very often our vision and mission statements tend to get blurred together, but really they play a different role. As we've said, vision statements are designed to help us be aspirational, to help us think about what we want to accomplish. A mission statement tells us how we're going to accomplish it. So, for example, Teach for America's vision, to attain an excellent education for all children. Great. How are we going to do that? The mission statement tells us it will achieve the vision by enlisting our nation's most promising future leaders in the effort. So aspirational, what are we doing? Our goal is to attain an excellent education for all students. Our way we're going to accomplish that is our mission statement, enlisting our nation's most promising future leaders in the effort. Now, let's remember what we said Pepsi's vision statement, that it was around top-tier financial performance over the long term. It integrates sustainability into our business strategy and leave a positive imprint in society and the environment. Okay, how are we going to do that? Mission statement gives us those insights. As one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world, our mission is to provide consumers around the world with delicious, affordable, convenient, and complementary foods and beverages, from wholesale breakfasts to healthy and fun daytime snacks and beverages to evening treats. We are committed to investing in our people, our company, and the communities where we operate to help position the company for long-term sustainable growth. So the vision statements is our aspiration. Here's what we want to accomplish, and the mission statement tells us how. So the vision and mission give us a sense of the directional guidance. Here's the markets we will be operating in. Here's the customers that we're going to focus in on. Our values give us our guardrails of the way we will operate. They guide our behavior. They help our employees understand how we are going to work within our company and within the marketplace, how we'll work with each other. They're particularly important when we run into complexity and conflict, where all of a sudden the values help define what kinds of decisions that we should be making. In a way, it provides the employees with a moral compass. You'll often see value statements or value components around the firm as reminders. So it'll be on the table of the various folks who are working, or it could be in the conference room, or it could be on the wall in some kind of artwork that we have. Values help us think about the ethics around how we will do business. And our chapter includes a lot of information about ethics. I won't repeat it here, but it's worth going through so that you can think about the ethical core values that are providing our foundation for how we're going to work together. So let's look at PepsiCo's values. Care for our customers and the world we live in. So notice how that connects to our vision and mission. All three of these should be aligned. Speak with truth and candor at all times. Respect others and succeed together. Sell only products we can be proud of. Win with diversity and engagement. And balance the short term and the long term. So as you look at these values, I'd like you to think about, what did you hear in the vision and mission statement that helped reinforce that? We said earlier that the vision, mission, and values of a company are foundational. I think this slide really helps us think through what that means. What it says is that our individual objectives and action plans, even the way we get feedback, should be aligned to the vision, mission, and values of the organization. That every level of the organization, whether we're talking about a corporate strategy, a business strategy, or a functional strategy, whether we're talking about individual strategic objectives or short-term information and objectives that we're focusing in on, everything should have that alignment back. So this vision, mission, and values should be clear enough that we understand this is how we're going to be operating and this is the markets that we're going to play in, and that we see that clear alignment with all of them. I mentioned last week that our focus is not only in terms of how the process of strategic planning takes place, how we end up formulating different strategies, how do we end up thinking through the analysis of whether we're on target or not. Beyond the how-tos, what we wanted to also focus in on is what makes a good strategic leader. And in our book, it defines the characteristics of good strategic leaders as those who have vision, eloquence, and consistency, a commitment to the organization. I would add in, as long as we're talking about C's, that we also have strong communication skills around both of those elements. Being well informed, being able to be aware of what's going on within our marketplace and within our company. Willingness to delegate and empower, so building the talents of our organization. An astute use of power. Critical thinking skills, we're going to talk more about that today, and emotional intelligence. Now, many of these concepts you've covered in your previous leadership classes. I want to expose you to a number of different models so that you can select the one that will work best for your particular area, because we're all working in different industries and with different companies. One of the models that we often see aligned with good strategic leaders is the level 5 pyramid. And we talk about level 5 leadership in LDR 6100, our introductory leadership. But just as a reminder, we've focused it in here on this particular slide. And a good way to remember it is, we're going to start out at level 1 with being the highly capable individual, someone who provides a contribution through a particular competency. Once we've mastered that individual competency level, we're going to start working together across teams. So we'll often become a team leader. And here we're starting to think about, how do we train individuals? How do we keep people motivated? As we move up to level 3, the competent manager, we start to think about, how do we now connect into the rest of the organization? In what way are we organizing resources for our functional area to accomplish the goals that we have? Level 4, the effective leader, provides compelling vision and mission. So we're starting to really define what it's like to work in our organization. And then finally, level 5 really has to do with building that greatness through a combination of willpower and humility. You'll see in our case materials that the leader from PepsiCo focuses in on what she calls the 5 C's. So the 5 C's help her think about what's critical in terms of leadership. So she'll look at competency, confidence, courage, the willingness to be able to go out on a line when you think something that is really important needs to happen. Communication skills, we talked about that a little bit earlier. And then a compass, the ability to have integrity, that you know what the right thing to do is. When you compare that to the level 5 leadership, do you notice how similar they are? So we're looking at the competency, that's really that level 1. Level 2, building our confidence and courage as we start to work as a team leader. Communication skills play a key role. And then throughout each one of these elements, we're looking at the compass, the integrity, what kind of ethics that we have associated with it. No matter what model you use, there are certain core skills that play a role. And I think the compass idea, this idea that we have integrity and ethics, is one of those core components, those core critical skills. Critical thinking is also one of those skills. It helps us think about how we're going to communicate, how do we problem solve, evaluate, what analysis do we play? Once we've done that analysis, how do we synthesize it together? And then how do we work together to foster understanding and good decision making? How do we guide action? All of those are requiring good critical thinking skills. Put another way, when you think about a good critical thinker, they're asking good questions, identifying problems, formulating them clearly and precisely. They're gathering the right amount of information and using abstract ideas so that we can interpret it effectively. They come to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions. They are conscious of their biases. They test them against relevant criteria and standards. They think open-minded so that they can identify opportunities that may not be obvious. And they communicate effectively with others. The Pearson study that we took this week is designed to help us think about the different skills around critical thinking. The Pearson study identifies 7 different thinking styles that all are identifying around skills for critical thinking: analytical, inquisitive, insightful, open-minded, systematic, timely, and truth-seeking. Notice the overlap again that we're seeing as we look at the different kinds of leadership models. So let's go through each one of these. So analytical tend to be organized, planful, and logical. Inquisitive, curious, they ask questions, they tend to probe deeply. Insightful, folks who are insightful are often prudent, humble, and reflected. Open-minded, open-minded are intellectually tolerant and fair-minded individuals. Systematic, folks who are systematic are very process-oriented, intuitive, can be very conceptual. Timely, these folks tend to be efficient, reliable, and responsive. And truth-seeking, independent, tough-minded, skeptical. So these thinking styles help us identify where our strengths are in terms of critical thinking skills and what kinds of things that we should be doing to help improve our different critical thinking styles. So as you looked at your styles, you have identified a primary style and a secondary style, but there's also a least preferred. And what I would like you to do is think about your results. What are the implications for those results? What kinds of things could you do more of? How could you improve these skills? Those are all things that you'll want to cover in your strategic leadership reflection paper. Now we can do this at an individual level, but we can also do this with a team profile. So if you have folks that currently are working with you together, you could have them complete the Pearson study as well. And then think about across your team, who is included in your team profile. Do you have a lot more analytical folks than you have insightful folks? Are your least prefers tend to be more timely or truth-seeking? This profile can help us think about areas that might be blind spots for our team. What ways are we going to compensate when we have a team that has certain strengths, maybe too many within that strength, and we have certain least preferred or weaknesses? In other words, we don't have a lot of folks in certain other areas. So I'd like you to just go through and think about the Pearson study and understand what kinds of action steps you're going to be taking based on the assessment you took. Now, when you took the assessment, it should have printed out a description that's specific just for you, and that'll give you some good insights about things that you can do. We've looked at our styles around critical thinking. The next thing I'd like to do is think about what are the kinds of action steps that we need to use that will help us be more effective in critical thinking, no matter what area we're working in. And Pearson has a model called the RED model that I really like. So we start out with the stop and reflect. And then as we're starting to gather information, we look at our own assumptions around it, and we recognize what are the assumptions in the work that we're doing. We evaluate arguments. What are the pros and cons of each of the information that we're providing and each potential solution? And from that, we draw conclusions. Now, I want to focus in specifically on how do we evaluate arguments, because of course we spent some time in the chapter talking about recognizing our biases and our assumptions. When we think about evaluating arguments, what we're trying to understand is, are there certain biases that we have, or perhaps others have, that tend to lead us in one direction versus another? So we want to be more systematic in terms of understanding what the pros and cons are, being aware of those biases, understanding the causation, what are the impact the decisions might have, who would disagree with your proposed solution. So if you don't have someone in the room disagreeing, is there someone that you could bring in that could act as a contrarian? What are other key points, models, or perspectives that you need to keep in mind as you evaluate an option? And then the overall impact or consequences of your decision. So these are the kinds of questions that we need to bring in when we're evaluating different opportunities. We completed a study to think about how we can lead strategically in a way that gets high performance across the organization. What we found is that leaders in high performing organizations tend to have different kinds of activities. They invest significant time on questions of strategy, but they're also linking it in terms of how we are going to make sure we have the right talent in place as leaders to execute that strategy. As a result, they'll distinguish between periodic strategic planning sessions from how we all are able to lead the organization overall. They know that good strategic leadership at the organizational level is going to be different than leading a team. They realize that when strategy lacks meaning for people, it's unlikely they're going to get to the essence of the strategic directives and perform at their highest potential. And they pay attention to how we are leading at every level within the organization so that they link the business strategy in a way that creates high performance. As we've been discussing critical thinking, hopefully you're starting to get a sense of the important role that questions play. They are important in terms of how we are identifying where we're going to focus our analysis. Questions are important throughout the analysis. They're important as we formulate the strategy, and they're important as we implement the strategy. Often what we found with our research is that people tend to ask the same kinds of questions over and over again. So we've listed the types of questions that you can ask, particularly when you're completing an analysis. And what we call it is pressure testing the analysis. I'd like you to take this chart with you in your next meeting and watch the type of questions that are asked. Are people asking clarity questions? Are they asking accuracy questions? Are they asking logic questions? Are they asking fairness questions? Just keep a list and a tally of how people are asking questions and what type of questions they're asked. If you're like most groups, what we're going to find is that we're asking the same kind of question, even though we think there's diversity in our questions. So what we have folks do is instead to really build those skills up is say, I'd like to ask a clarity question. In other words, define the kind of question you're asking. And what you'll be sensitized to is that you're asking the same type of question, and you'll recognize that you need to ask different questions. So this graphic, while it identifies how that you can identify certain kinds of questioning, is probably one of the most important of our entire week because it's a great tool to help improve the way we ask questions, which is important to every type of work that we're doing. So we've been talking for about 45 minutes now. Let's take a few minutes to just do a quick summary. We said that there are two foundational ingredients for competitive advantage. Our vision, mission, and I would argue our value statements. They're the foundation for our work, and effective strategic leadership. And our time together has been focused on both. When we're talking about the role that vision, mission, and values play, they each have a different role. A vision is more aspirational. It inspires and motivates the members of the organization. The mission statement tells us how we're going to accomplish that vision. And the values define our ethical standards or norms that govern our behavior within individuals of the organization. The more we can able to connect our employees or our teams into vision, mission, and value statements, the more motivating it is. We need to recognize that every employee plays a strategic role within the organization, and we have to think about processes that will enhance our ability to connect in with all the folks at different levels. So think Frappuccino. The strategic implications of product and customer-oriented vision statements really have to do with how we define our business. Product-oriented vision statements tend to define our business in terms of goods and services. Customer-oriented vision statements tend to provide it in terms of how we're producing solutions to customer needs. Initially, we'll think of product-oriented vision statements that they can be very limiting if we end up identifying what narrow business we're in. But they can also help us identify what way we should be organizing our company. So think Shell here. If we're a low-cost producer, all of our activities should be supporting that. To be effective, vision and mission statements need to be backed up by hard-to-reverse strategic commitments that are tied to economic fundamentals. In other words, we should be leveraging our vision, mission, and value statements throughout the entire organization. We said that when we're thinking about strategic planning, there are three different types of approaches. A top-down, which tends to be sequential, that linear process that we saw, our boxes. We can do scenario planning, which helps us envision what kinds of things that we can do, or how do we prepare contingency plans. That we can really have an emergent process, which is top-up, bottom-up, top-down, bottom-up, which helps us think about gathering information from deep within the organization. And ultimately, the firm's strategy is going to be a combination of all of those things. So after you completed our work together in our class presentation, your next step is to go to the assignments folder. You'll want to make sure you cover any reading assignments. This week we'll be talking about the balanced scorecard and some of our reading. You'll also want to complete your strategic leader skills. So for this week we're taking the Pearson assessment, which you can locate for free. You'll see the link included on the very front of the syllabus. And that's going to help you think about your personal SWOT and ultimately your strategic leadership reflection paper. We're going to talk about more of that in a minute. Our online discussion this week is about PepsiCo. Within the assignment folder, you'll find more information about the case study. And then what I'd like you to do is after you finish going through all your individual assignments for this week, it's time to go to our signature assignments folder. Remember, we're going to be completing a case study assignment that is due at the end of this week. The case study assignment is detailed in the syllabus, and we talked a little bit about it last week. But what you're going to do is provide us information that we're going to then use as a foundation for selecting one or two of the case studies that the teams will focus in on over the next couple of weeks to apply everything that we have been learning. So I thought it would be helpful to spend a few minutes talking about your strategic leadership reflection presentation that you will be providing to us during week 4. And the specific date can be found both in the signature assignments folder or in your syllabus on page 4. So the reflection video should include the following items: what your original point of view was when you arrived here around strategic leadership, and what are your goals in advancing your knowledge as you go through this class? Has that changed at all based on the weeks that we've done our work? Your personal SWOT, your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. Remember that strengths and weaknesses are your own self-assessment. You're probably pretty used to doing that. You'll want to incorporate all the different assessments that we have had. Your opportunities and threats talk about where you're taking your career. What are the opportunities within your career? What are the potential threats? You'll need to make sure that you then provide us with a series of reflections, and you can see some of the questions identified there. As you think about your own skills, what are the things that you're learning? What kinds of frameworks are going to help you grow as a strategic leader? Are there certain approaches that you have typically used, and are you going to do something differently? Why would you do that? Be sure to discuss any biases that you arrived with and how our class has opened up those biases, and how you make sure that you're aware of those biases as you move forward. It's important to include your critical thinking skills assessment and your plan to help develop those least preferred critical thinking skills. And then, as a strategic leader, your conclusion. What are your key takeaways from this? How is coursework broadening your thought process? So that gives you a sense of what you need to cover for your strategic leadership reflection, and you're building on it every week that we're working together through a number of different sources. You can find the same information in the syllabus and identified in the signature assignments. So that's our first part of our presentation today. In a few minutes, you'll want to take a break and then come back and start to look at external analysis. What are the tools and how do we apply that? Have a great day.